Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to your recorded session for today's lesson. I thought that I would do things differently, and here's my new approach. So what you're going to do, you're going to watch this recording, which I'm going to explain about report writing, specifically short report writings. And then at the end, there will be an assignment that you will have to complete in 2 weeks or in a week and a half, something like that. So what are the objectives for my lesson for today? I want to distinguish, or I want you to be able to do two things. So I want you to be able to distinguish the difference between short informal reports, long formal kind of research reports, something that we will work on later. And it will be, of course, your last assignment. Oh, look at me, I'm hiding some words. Okay. And also, I want you to be able to write different kinds of reports, but my focus for today is going to be the incident report. So let's start. Let's the journey begins. So the first thing that I want you to understand is what is a report, okay? Reports usually come in different, different lengths. They come in different levels of formality. They have different styles, and of course, they serve different purposes. So sometimes they might overlap with the purpose. Sometimes you might do more than one purpose for the same report, but they are different in general. What they actually do is that they always present a kind of record of work accomplished. So whether your purpose is to research a certain topic, write about it, whether you want to record incident as you see them and write them about, whether you're talking about progress you have achieved in your work, you always, in a way, you always report about something that is accomplished, something that you have achieved. Now, it always record and clarify complex information for future reference. So if you are, let's say, writing a feasibility report, which is kind of a recommendation report, you are explaining stuff that might not be clear to the public or might not be clear to your audience. And this will be used later to explain other stuff or to take a number or a set of actions. It always presents information to a large number of people. Because you are talking about a document, you are not going to be the sole reader of the document. It is usually meant for a larger number of people to read. So for example, if I take the accident report as an example, or incident report, it will be read by a good number of people in an organization, and also it will be used for future reference, so it will always be reread different times. So the number of people we're talking about here is really huge. So to continue, talking about also what is a report, it is always a kind of a record of problems encountered. The only way to improve work, the only way to improve organizations, companies, etc., is to write reports to show how, let's say, a number of problems that you have faced while doing something, and then the company will read your report, suggest a number of actions, recommendations, so that you can overcome these problems. So the only way to kind of record these problems are done in reports. Also, it is a way to document schedules, timetables, and milestones. So if you're talking about a progress report, for example, and you want to show your management how much you have achieved in your work, so usually you write a progress report where it shows that this is what you finished in January, this is what you finished in February, or maybe this is what finished in 2017, 18, 19, etc. As I said before, it always recommends future actions. So reports without recommendations are meaningless. There's no need to write a report if you're not going to suggest something to do in the future. Your recommendation can depend, of course, on the nature of your report, but there's always this chance for improvement, if I might say, so that you do not do the same mistakes again or do things differently to achieve a better result. And of course, you are documenting what is currently happening, the current status, and of course, to make sure that it is reflected on and improved in the future. And you also record procedures. This is usually applicable if you are going to work in a technical field. There's always a record of whatever procedure you're following. So let's say you are disassembling a jet engine, you write a report explaining what you did. And you do that, number one, for record, so that anybody comes later for quality assurance, they make sure that you did the right job. And number two, for quality assurance to review and maybe suggest better ways of assembling or disassembling a jet engine in the future. Now, we talked about what are reports. How can we categorize reports? How can we put them into different categories? We can do that in different ways, and I chose for you the best ways to do so. You can distinguish or categorize them as per length and scope. And in this way, you divide reports into short reports and long reports. Short reports usually are between 1 page to 5 pages, so they are very short in nature, and they are focusing on very specific topic with a very limited scope. In other words, you wouldn't imagine a lot of research happening there. It's more of recording of what is happening and suggesting a set of actions and recommendations. While on the other side, long reports are more than 5 pages. These are what we call research-based reports, and they focus on topics with larger scope. So it's not really about recording what is happening now. It's more about digging deeper to understand something and to recommend something that is definitely not a simple procedure or not a simple action, but rather something quite big in nature. You can also divide reports per formality. Some of them are informal in nature, or some of them are informal. Formality and tone are very similar. And you remember when we talked about tone. Tone is the way that you address your audience. So you address your audience informally if you know the people you're talking to, if they are your friends, if they are, let's say, your family, and if you are your colleagues at work with a friendly email from now and on. But if you're talking, for example, to something of more of a serious nature, and your audience are more kind of like serious people, then of course your tone changes. So again, you divide them into informal short reports. So they are usually produced in forms of memos, emails, or formal long reports. And I can give you that the longer the report is, the more formal it is in nature. You can also um, categorize reports per purpose. In other words, what is the purpose behind your report? And this goes back to the whole idea of technical writing, if you remember, understanding the purpose of your writing. So you can have, for example, informative reports. Informative reports basically are about presenting information. So you present information, you explain, as I said here, how, here's what happened, etc. And you just list things from what you know from your point of view. But there's no analysis in here, there's no argument, nothing. The second one is the analytical reports. Here, you're not really presenting information only, but also you are presenting your interpretation of this information. So for example, you are presenting the number of students who pass, for example, a certain exam. If you're doing informative reports, you just give the numbers. But if you're doing analytical report, then you need to analyze and find trends. For example, you might say that 50% of the students who pass the exam are female and 50% are male. 50% are in ages between 18 to 20, while the rest are, for example, older, younger, etc. You might also mention about the seniority in years. So here what you're doing, you're no longer just presenting information, you are analyzing information and presenting it in a report. The third type of report is the persuasive report, which is about convincing. So there is an argument here, and you want to change people's mind about it. Usually, this is something you find in feasibility reports and recommendation reports, proposals. When you have an idea and you want to convince somebody that your idea is valid, is credible, and that it should be adapted, or adopted. For example, you're writing a feasibility report about building a new extension to your building or to your company. And so you propose something, you propose a new plan, and you show what would be the margin of profit, what would be the expenses, and you want your management to see this report and get convinced and go on with the plan of building a new extension to the building. So informative, analytical, and persuasive. So far in this semester, we have talked about informative kind of writing. So what you've done so far, you wrote technical description, you wrote process analysis, instructions, and they are all in general kind of informative. In terms of analytical and persuasive, you will do some kind of analytical report, and that will be your last assignment for this semester. Something, again, I will talk about later in the coming 2 weeks, maybe not next week, but the week after that. And in terms of persuasive reports, we are going to do some samples of these as we go on in the semester. So, as I said, you can categorize reports per purpose, and per the tone or the formality, and also per the length and the scope. Now let's examine different types of reports. And here today my focus is on short reports. There are many different types of short reports. There are incident reports, investigative reports, progress reports, lab report, feasibility and recommendation reports, and there are many others. Now I know already you do a lot of lab reports because you have practical. So I want to focus today only on one type of reports, which is the incident report. And you are going to have a kind of practice in a form of an assignment, which I will present and talk about it at the end of this video today. So let's see what I mean by an incident report. Before doing that, and of course this is applicable to incident reports, let's talk about what you should include in this report in terms of organization. What are the main sections and so on. So there is always this identification line. In other words, this is like the title of your report, or if you're writing in a form of an email or a memo, it will be like the identification line. And as I told you before, it shouldn't be titled as incident report. It should be given a very specific name or title with focus. And of course, you have the heading and the subheadings, and there's always an introduction, there's always a discussion and a conclusion. So in a way, it's very similar to normal kind of writing, but the added elements in here are just the headings and the subheadings. It's in a way you can include headings and subheadings or titles and subtitles in your report easily with no problem. Now, let's talk about incident report. As you can see in the picture in front of you, this is an example of a typical kind of incident that usually occurs in any place of constructions. And of course, you are going to be all engineers and technicians. You are going to be dealing with hazards and incidents like that. Maybe not necessarily in a construction place, but there are like workshops, there are labs, place of work. When you're dealing with machines, when you're dealing with sensitive, equipment, when you're dealing with specific hazardous materials, you always expect to see incidents. And part of your job as engineers and technicians is to be able to write a decent and a well-structured kind of incident report. So, incident report, it is an accident or incident report, and it's a documentation of any injury, accident, work stoppage, which means work stopped for a reason, equipment failure, work illnesses, or personal problem. So any incident or any of these happened, you need to write an incident report. So if somebody was injured, there's a need to write an incident report. If, for example, an equipment failed, for a piece of equipment failed for some reason, you need to write an incident report. So in all these cases, everything should be reported because this will make your job valid. And again, in terms of quality assurance, you make sure that everything is documented as piece of evidence. Now, you might write an accident report if someone was injured at work, as I say, machinery broke, machinery malfunction, which means machinery damage. work stopped for a significant period of time. So we're not talking about a stoppage of 5 to 10 minutes. We're talking about more than 1 hour of stoppage, which usually affects productivity. Okay. Now, why it's important? It's important because they will be used for insurance claims. So imagine somebody working with you or somebody working at your company. If you're not writing incident reports and you're not documenting everything as it happened, somebody might go and sue the company and you might actually cost them a lot of money. Also, sometimes the incident might lead to big injury for the worker, and this usually goes to court, and there should be a kind of compensation given to the worker. So if you don't document it well, you might unnecessarily pay a lot of money while the incident was very specific. And of course, vice versa, the opposite is true. If you have your reports written poorly, you might actually have the blame being put on somebody else and not really the person responsible. So in a way, you want people who are the victim of these incidents to get what is fair for them, and you want those who are responsible to be accountable for that. But if you don't write good reports, this might get lost, and in the end, those who are the victims might not get really what they deserve, and those who have caused the accident might just get away, and you end up as a company paying for all the compensation, which is of course not correct or not right. And plus, don't forget, you write these reports so that you make sure, as you will see later, there are a number of recommendations you put in the end. So you don't want something like that to happen again. You don't want people to get injured all the time. And when writing reports, certain set of actions are taken and recommendations are taken into consideration, so things like that will not happen again. So what goes in an incident or accident report? Of course, you need to include what happened, why it happened, and what is the business or what the business or the company did about it, and what is going to do about it. In other words, you need to say exactly in details what happened in that incident. You need to explain the reasons behind why do you think it happened, and from your observation, from witnesses, etc., and the testimonies. And also you want to see what did the company do about it. Was the police called, the ambulance, first aid taken, not, and what they will do about it later in the future. Were there any recommendation actions that the company has to do and follow in the future? So this is a kind of a checklist for accident incident reports, something to remind you what you need to include in your report. So there's a necessity to include the date of the event, where it happened, the full name of the people involved, and that means the victim, the injured, and the witnesses, the supervisor of the place, the safety officer, and so on. Events leading up to the accident, how the accident happened chronologically speaking. So there is a time order in there. Environmental conditions, if applicable. In other words, if there was an injury and you noticed that there was a slippery floor, you need to mention that. If there were like some hazardous materials left unnoticed or not in their place, you need to write that. Description of the job duty that was being performed. So what was the worker, the technician, the engineer doing when the accident took place? Detailed description of the event. So you need to describe everything in details. The more detailed, the better. Parts of body injured or parts of equipment damaged. In both cases, you need to mention. If it's only parts of the injured, like if there was a twisted leg or twisted ankle, or for example, burn, scald, etc. And if there was an piece of equipment that is damaged, part of it, or it's completely, you need to mention that. Description of the employee's reason immediately after the event. So you need to take their words. You need to understand what happened. If they are, of course, if they are conscious. If they are subconscious, please don't just find a way to wake them up because they might be in critical condition. But if they can speak, if the injury is not really that big, you need to take word by word how, from their own understanding, how this thing happened, the extent of the damage, was the damage big, small, etc., and treatment of injury or course of action taken. In other words, if there was somebody injured, where the first aid, usually steps taken or not, and so on. So this is like a checklist for an accident incident report. So again, these are the parts of incident report when you narrate it. So there's a subject line, it has to be specific and brief, the introduction, so you give an overview of what is happening and the background information. In the body, you mention in detail. So here it's where you write the story in details. And of course, in the conclusion, there's always about what is going to be the corrective action, what are the recommendations, and what is the company going to do after that. So this is an example of an incident report. So you've noticed that the identification line is there. Now it's written as a memo style. Even if it's not written as a memo style, if it's written like a written document, you need to give it a specific title that is clear and specific. You can see there's the introduction, where it's written the accident summary, and then the body where you have the accident details, and then the recommendation represents the conclusion. And here is another example that you can read later on your own of using narrative to state what actually happened. And you've noticed it's like you are reading a story, and it is because you are writing details of of something that happened, and you're including every detail possible, whether it's the location, the time, the place, the people involved, and again, a narrative, a narration of how the incident took place. So, what are you going to do? You see, today's lesson is very straightforward, something that is not really unfamiliar to you. And that's what I thought, since you have midterm this week, it would be a good idea to give you a break and again, give you some kind of pace that you can do yourself. So your assignment number 3 is going to be, of course, an incident report. It is going to be Blackboard assessment assignments. It is a group work as usual. And what you need to do, there is going to be an attachment there. You open the word attachment and you will see at the very beginning, there is a scenario, okay? And you need to study the scenario and you need to write an incident report. And what I want you to do is to complete 2 things. First, you need to complete the template, which is in the word attachment. You find it down. If you scroll down, you find a template where you just write the main ideas. And then you need to write a narrative report detailing the incident, exactly in the way that I explained in the video today. Of course, you will have this PowerPoint available in week number 9. When is going to be the deadline? It's going to be the 31st of October, end of day, which means you have around almost 2 weeks to finish it. So it's not going to be next week. It's going to be the week after that, Saturday, end of day. And as I say, you need to study carefully. Now, in the attachment, I also gave you more information about incident report, again, to help you come up with a really decent report. Now, I'm just giving you a scenario, but of course, you need to fill in the spaces of the story from your mind. Use your imagination and place all the small pieces of the incident. I'm just giving you the headline, and you need to fill it in with more information from your mind. So this is the end of our session about report writing, short reports, and our focus today was about incident reports. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you around. And don't forget that next week on Sunday, we have our midterm. So good luck to all of you.